Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I take time to watch birds as I go about my daily tasks. In my show, I'll tell you about the wild birds I've seen, speak with other enthusiasts, take bird walks, and share stories from listeners around the world. In case you missed it, last episode I spoke with Jamie Wyver from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the RSPB, about the Big Garden Birdwatch, a survey of the local bird species seen in our gardens and parks. It's a great example of community science. Do take a listen. This week is the second of a series of audio diaries about my lockdown birding. In this series, I review the daily entries in my bird journal, sharing the bird species I've seen, behaviours I've observed, and changes I'm noticing as the year progresses, all from an extremely local viewpoint. This episode is brought to you by Casual Birder Weekly, the show's newsletter. Each week, I share birdwatching tips, bird news that's caught my eye, recommendations for other podcasts or books I've enjoyed, and I let you know about any planned group birdwatch events. While the show has a really awesome Facebook group, I know that I connect with some of you on other platforms. This newsletter is a great way for us all to stay in touch. Sign up now. The link is in the show notes. Week 2 of my lockdown birdwatching diaries. So this past week has been pretty rubbish weather-wise. We've had fog, drizzle, rain, high winds. It's been pretty awful. There have been times where we've had blue skies, but they're so few and far between. Try to remember to take joy when seeing them. But we're back today. I'm standing here looking out of my bedroom window, my favourite birdwatching spot, and it's just a blanket of grey cloud. So along with the traffic noise outside, this morning I've heard quite a lot of bird song, particularly from a blue tit that's been calling out a lot. Currently in the garden I have 2 wood pigeons and a lesser black-backed gull just flew past, along with a magpie nearby. So once again I'll briefly go through the days of the week and what I saw each day. On Tuesday it was wet, overcast, drizzling most of the day. I only put seed out in my ground feeder trays that day rather than suet pellets, because when it's wet like that they just become sludge, and I don't think it's particularly good to put that out for the birds. I had 10 species that I saw that day at various times looking out the window. Only 6 of them were actually in the garden. That was the wood pigeon, only 3 that day, surprisingly. Blackbird, had jackdaws coming down for the nuts in shells, a rook, house sparrow, and I had another little visit of 4 long-tailed tits. They just stopped by with the rest of the flock flying through. So that was cheery to see those anyway. On Wednesday, foggy, overcast, and then the drizzle turned to heavier rain during my morning bird watch. And it was really quiet in the garden. I heard a goldfinch fly over, but nothing in the garden. Again, I only saw during the day 6 species. I did see the dunnock that day as well, so that was an additional species. And I had a few more wood pigeon. There were 8 that came into the garden that day. But generally, it was wet. Just occasionally you'd have the blackbird come out and hop around the garden, and that was it. So really, really quiet day. On the Thursday, I actually got out quite early. It was overcast and wet, but I was aware that I hadn't been putting food out much over the last couple of days because of the rain. So I went out to dislodge the 2 hanging feeders. I shake them to make sure that the seed isn't getting clogged up. While I was standing there, it was still sort of semi-darkness. I hadn't noticed that a blackbird had come out from the shrub to start eating what I was dropping on the floor. I threw a couple of bits of chopped nut and suet over to where it was, and it came out and stood quite happily just a couple of feet away from me, eating what I was putting down. I waited until about 9:30 that morning to do my bird watch because it was so dark and dreary, and it just didn't feel like the day was coming alive at all. Again, my regular birds had 9 wood pigeon, the couple of blackbirds, 2 blue tits turned up during the bird watch, dunnock, house sparrow, and again the long-tailed tits flew by. So hopefully they're starting to recognise that my garden is one to stop at as they fly through. One thing I did notice, I heard the song thrush singing quite early on. It's quite a few streets over. It's nowhere near where my garden is, but it is a joy to hear it calling out, and it just feels like the birds are thinking that the days are getting longer and it's worth marking out your territories. Friday was actually not too bad a day. It was a bit damp and a bit overcast, but it wasn't that cold out. So I settled myself at the window ready to do my bird watch, and my neighbours had chosen that day to get some work done on their house. All the noise of the works that they were doing was scaring the birds off. Big clatter of wings as all the wood pigeon flew away, which scared everything else away. So it wasn't a particularly successful bird watch that morning, and I only noted 4 bird species in the garden. But the 4th species was my first one of the year for my garden, which was a wren, which I was delighted to see. So last year we'd had a wren in the garden a few times. I'd definitely heard one calling out in the mornings. I hadn't heard one... I think I heard one earlier on this year, one morning. The 3rd of January was the first time I heard a wren calling this year, but I hadn't seen one yet. Maybe my garden is part of its territory. Saturday dawned windy, raining, poor visibility, but when I first looked out, which was about 8:45, when I could finally drag myself out of bed, there was a blackbird hopping around the garden, a robin singing, and 3 of my friendly wood pigeons. But again, other than that, and seeing a male house sparrow and a dunnock later on, wasn't really much else in the garden. I really think that when it's raining, it's hard to see very much at all. They must all go off and hide somewhere to shelter from the rain and the wind. Sunday was one of the better days of the week. It was sunny, a calm day, and I finally left the house and went for a walk. We took a walk up to Old Down Park, which is, it's a 5-minute drive. We chose to drive there because it was getting later on in the morning by the time we went out. That was a really nice walk. So I had 14 species seen that day, which included new species for the year for me. So not lifers, but just new ones that I hadn't yet seen this year, of common pheasant, green woodpecker, and confirmed lesser black-backed gull. Now, while I've been standing here, I've actually had a lesser black-backed gull fly over, but until that point, I hadn't seen any from my house. We saw 3 red kite flying quite low, and one of them landed in one of the fields, which I tried to get photographs of, but too far off really to do. I'm always tempted with my super zoom camera to take photographs that really I shouldn't because it's just too far away. The green woodpecker was a nice surprise. I thought I'd seen something green flash across some rooftops, but then when I looked with binoculars, all I could see were wood pigeons, so I thought I'd just mistaken the view. And then we were standing in the field watching some blue tits and heard this sort of noise of its wings as we looked round. This green woodpecker was flying in a really straight line across the field, but its wings were surprisingly noisy, and so we just watched that as it flew past. Then it landed in a stand of trees at the other side of the field and called out. So that was really good to hear. I also saw a common buzzard, so that added to my species list as well. We were only out for an hour or so, but I added 4 species to my species list, so I'm now up to 25 species for the year, which is very low for real enthusiast birders, but for someone who's in lockdown with a limited garden range and who's not getting out very much, it's okay. I'm quite pleased with what I've seen. Monday, we're back to damp again, but there was high cloud and it did occasionally let the blue sky show. So I did my bird watch at 8:30 that morning, and the blackbirds were being very active again. I think the newer blackbirds were around the garden, so they were being chased out. I could hear the song thrush again, and the blue tit has really, really ramped up its calling this week. The jackdaw that had the bad right foot came along to get some nuts, and it was joined by another jackdaw, and they seem to be associating together, so I do think it's part of a pair. So that was my second week of lockdown. Pretty low numbers of birds to be seen, but it was good to have got out to Old Down and had a chance to walk out and stretch the legs. I do understand how a bit demoralising it is when the weather's so bad and you look out hoping to see things and there's just nothing around. Even looking under the shrubs, looking for dunnock, sometimes you'll be lucky and see it, but it'll be fleeting glimpses and then gone again. So what I've resorted to doing, because as you know, I'm posting a bird a day on my social media channels, I have now started going back through my vacation photographs. And in this current week, I'm posting photographs from our vacation to Mexico back in 2019. I've also been peeking back at photographs from when we were lucky enough to go to Australia and to South America, so they'll be showing up in future weeks. The other thing that surprised me was that I've got a lot of photos from my South American trip that I haven't actually identified the birds properly, or I've probably identified them in my bird diaries, but I haven't put them into eBird, so I don't have them really officially as part of my life list. So over the next few weeks there'll be some work to be done there. I'm afraid I haven't got much to report with how far I've taken my garden. All I've done is been looking at Pinterest to get some ideas for what other people do in their small garden spaces. I'm quite keen on getting something that looks like vertical flower pots or some sort of vertical garden to put in certain areas, just to make it feel like there's more there. At the moment I'm looking out onto just brown fence panels. There's not enough green to be seen. Oh, and how surprising, I'm just looking out of the window and the wood pigeon has now discovered that feeder that I mentioned that has the peanuts and the suet in. It's flapping its wings and balancing, but I don't think that feeder's going to last very long before the base falls off. Oh well, it lasted just over a week, so we'll see at what point it collapses. In fact, the only other bird that I've seen feed there has been a robin, which I noticed this morning for the first time. A large bird just flew over as well, which distracted me. It may have been a red kite. So that's the end of my week 2 lockdown birding. I hope your week is going well and I hope you're all staying safe out there. This last weekend was the Big Garden Birdwatch. Those who took part were asked to watch birds in their gardens or other outside space, and note the maximum number of each species that visited during the hour. I did my count on Sunday, the last of the 3 eligible days. So I'm just about to start my Big Garden Birdwatch. I'll be out here for an hour. It's pretty cold, but I've got hot coffee, I've got my notepad, and I've refilled all the feeders. There's quite a few birds around, so we'll see what we see. Well, that's my Big Garden Birdwatch completed for this year. Had 9 species visiting, 2 jackdaw, blue tit, house sparrow, blackbird, magpie, dunnock, carrion crow, robin and wood pigeon. I sat out in our summer house and the wood pigeon landed on the roof of the summer house during the count with a big flump, but I knew what it was. It landed in the garden shortly afterwards. But anyway, very cold and not as pleasant outside as it has been in previous years. It was much busier in the garden before the count, and for the first 20 minutes it was very, very quiet in the garden, so I was a bit worried nothing was going to turn up. But I know it's a snapshot of the usual garden visitors, and so I'm glad there were some that turned up during the actual count, but I'm happy to take part. I hope your Big Garden Birdwatch went well too. Personal recommendation has been shown to be the #1 way that people find out about podcasts. So, if you enjoy this show, please tell a friend or give the show a shout out on social media. You can also help support the show's production by buying me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. Your donations help fund my production costs and are really appreciated. Thanks to Bethany for supporting the show in this way since the last episode. Do keep in touch. I love to hear about the birds you're seeing. You can tell me about your sightings by leaving me a message on SpeakPipe or on the contact form on my website, casualbirder.com. And do sign up for my newsletter, Casual Birder Weekly. Links to all of these are in the show notes. Make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing to the show. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.